Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to AMPC's webinar series. Today, we have a webinar. It's titled Introduction to Water Stewardship to Australian Red Meat Processors. And as we know, processors have always taken water as an important KPI for their reduction. And in actual fact, processors have reduced their water intensity since 2005 by 8%. That's mostly been through water efficiency and also through investment in recycling. However, water stewardship is very different. Instead of looking inside the processor boundary, water stewardship looks outside the processor boundary and looks for opportunities to collaborate with processor community and understand issues with community stakeholders around water stewardship. Today, we're really fortunate to have a great team. Two teams, in fact, Bernadette McCabe as the lead provider from USQ, who will introduce the members of the team. I'd like to hand over to Bernadette. Thanks, Bernadette.
Thanks very much, Matt. And today I would just like to introduce the team, as Matt said. Thank you, first of all, for joining us today in the first webinar introducing water stewardship for the Australian red processing sector. So I'm Bernadette McCabe, as Matt mentioned, and I'd like to start briefly by introducing the team before we look more closely at the water stewardship. So perhaps, Penny, if you can just continue on to the next slide. Yeah, so just to go through today's webinar and just giving you a brief synopsis, after I introduce the project team, I'll hand over to Penny, who will provide a bit of an overview around what water stewardship is and what the AWS is, and to look about really the great opportunities it holds for the red meat processing sector, to highlight the benefits that industry has had in terms of participating in water stewardship. Penny will also go into a case study using the Ingham group, where they were looking at achieving the highest level of certification against the International Water Stewardship Standard, the IWS, at 2 of its plants. And I'll also then give a bit of an overview of why it's important for red meat processors to get involved, and then discuss in a little bit more detail around the methodology for which we'll apply, particularly in the coming months leading up to the end of the year, and how you as a processor can get involved. And then we'll open it up to discussion in perhaps the last 15 minutes or so. Next slide, please. So as Matt mentioned, we are, Kate and myself are from the University of Southern Queensland, based here at the Toowoomba campus in Queensland. My role is Director at the Centre for Agricultural Engineering, which is one of 9 research centres. We've got a long history of working with red meat processing sector and around sustainability, particularly waste management and energy. But we also have Dr. Kate Reardon-Smith, who is a senior lecturer within the School of Agriculture and Environmental Science, but also does a lot of her research in the Centre for Applied Climate Sciences, but is a experienced ecologist and does a lot around sustainability. Next slide, please, Penny. And through, we're having a partnership with the Eco-Efficiency Group, and this is be led by Penny Prasad, and also team members Nicole Price, Jane Cathol. They're all directors of the Eco-Efficiency Group and have a wealth of experience in this area of stewardship, having have credited as specialist for the Alliance for Water Stewardship. So you're in good hands with this team. Next slide, please. So I'll hand over to you, Penny, to discuss our first item there, to do a bit more of a deep dive around exactly what water stewardship is. Thank you.
Okay. So thanks, Bernadette. I'd just like to say what an opportunity it is for us to be working with the red meat processing industry on a water stewardship project. it's something that we've wanted to do for quite a while. So it's really good that we've got the opportunity to do that now. So, so why do we need water stewardship? So the water stewardship standard itself, it's fairly new to Australia, but it's making a lot of ground internationally, and there's a lot of, or quite a few international companies that are picking up on the standard. But what is water stewardship? So as we all know, water is a critical resource. It's required by our communities for domestic uses, for food and fibre production, for industries, utilities, for power generation, for mining. It's required for social and cultural services, and it's critical for our ecosystem services. And you can see there's a lot of competing or competition for water on our planet. We have issues with increasing population, over extraction of water in areas, pollution and salinity, and then the declining health of our ecosystems. So water stewardship stems from the idea that water is a finite and shared resource, and it's coming under unprecedented pressure with all this competition. Therefore, it's essential that all water users work together to responsibly safeguard, plan and manage water use. And that means using water in ways that are economically beneficial, socially equitable and environmentally sustainable. So water stewardship itself it requires collaboration and collaborative solutions. So this is achieved through a stakeholder inclusive process. It involves being efficient around water management at a site basis. And looking more broadly than that, it looks at catchments and what the collective actions are across catchments to be using water responsibly. And importantly, with those collective actions and with the concept of water stewardship and the standard, it's important that any actions that a company follows or tries to achieve contributes to existing catchment initiatives, and it's not replacing or competing with any other initiatives that other stakeholders might be following. With respect to the standard itself, so the standard was developed. Oops, I'll just get rid of that. The standard was developed in 2009. It's up to version 2 at the moment. So it's a globally applicable framework for any water user, no matter their size, location, or their complexity. It applies to all water types. So whether you're using piped town water, or you might be extracting bore water or getting water from a stream or the ocean even, there must be a physical scope where your organisation is impacting on water use through extraction or through discharge, which is beyond your site boundary. And another aspect with the water stewardship standard is that it's applicable to all sorts of organisations. So if there are a group of smaller sites that are located near each other and they have a shared water challenge, then they can team up and look at implementing the standard as a group. Oh, playing up again, doesn't want to forward through. Here we go, okay. So the standard itself, so it's set up around that continuous improvement framework. So there's 5 steps within the standard. The first step is all about collecting data on shared water challenges and understanding what the issues are around water for your organisation. So gathering and understanding all that data. Once that is done, you make a public commitment to be working on a water stewardship project, and you plan what the water stewardship project will be about. And then following that, there's the implementation and evaluation stages, and then communicating and publicly disclosing the initiatives that you've been working on. So they're the 5 main steps. The standard has 5 outcomes that it's trying to achieve, and these are good water governance, sustainable water balance, good water quality status, important water-related areas, and the wash outcomes, so safe water, sanitation and hygiene for all. There are sets of criteria across all of those, and there's around about 50 to 60 different indicators across the entire standard. So with this particular, with our project, we'll be focusing on step 1, but we'll pick up on that a little bit more as we go through this presentation. So each of the 5 steps has a number of criteria that need to be addressed. With the 50 to 60 indicators that I mentioned, there's core indicators and advanced indicators. And depending on the number of indicators that a company might tick off, they will achieve core, gold or platinum certification for the water stewardship. So I'd just like to talk a little bit about Ingham's and the Ingham's Water Stewardship Program. So the Ingham's Group has poultry processing facilities and farms across Australia and New Zealand, and it's the largest integrated poultry producer in both countries. So at the peak of the millennial drought, Ingham's was listed in the top 10 water users in Melbourne, Brisbane and Sydney. And the company faced intense public scrutiny, with negative publicity finding its way to the front of major newspapers at the time. So they found themselves in a position where they needed to explain to the community and stakeholders and defend their use of water, and think about ways to manage water more effectively and communicate that to the regulators and to the community. So I was, really forced into the position of having a social license to use the water that they're using. So Ingham's have 4 processing facilities in Western Port, one in Western Port, which is just south of Melbourne. There's one in Brisbane, here at Murarrie, and there's 2 down in South Australia. So the Ingham's company were originally involved in developing the Water Stewardship Standard in 2009. It wasn't until they had a fire at their Somerville processing facility that some opportunities were opened up to look at how they were managing water within the facility and really take some big steps forward with respect to water stewardship. So as a result of the fire, they built an advanced water treatment and recycling plant, and they actually were able to reduce their mains water usage by 70%, which is quite amazing. They also then joined the Western Port Water Stewardship Project in 2015. And so here's some of the stakeholders that were involved in that project. So there's several utilities with Melbourne Water, South East Water, Southern Rural Water. There was EPA Victoria involved, councils, Parks Victoria, and there was also some other community groups involved with this project. And as the years went by, and they worked on their water stewardship projects, there were a whole bunch of other stakeholders that got involved, including local schools that were helping with revegetation. So one of the main outcomes was the work around Watson Creek. So Watson Creek flows through the Ingham processing site, and it also flows through various landholders which are adjacent to the Ingham site at Somerville. And the creek flows into internationally significant Ramsar wetlands and the Western Port Marine National Park. So these are areas that are, have great ecological significance and really important to be looking after them. So Watson Creek at the time was previously known as one of the dirtiest waterways in Victoria. However, the Inghams work along with working with the landholders within the catchment has had great success in improving the water quality of Watson Creek. So Ingham's worked with landholders, catchment groups, local schools, as I mentioned, to revegetate the riparian area, which fell within the Ingham site and also outside of their site boundary. So the image that you see there on the right is the revegetation that was done, and that's how the site looked about 8 years after they started working on the particular site. We tried to get a before and after picture for you, but we just couldn't source one. But. Okay. So one of the, we see this as being, you know, Ingham's really took the lead with this water stewardship project. And we see this as being one of the leading projects because it's been running for a long time now, for over 8 years. And during that time, they've Ingham's and the water stewardship, the other stakeholders that were working on this project, have managed to expand that water stewardship concept far broader than just their original catchment. So you can see there that it's all around the eastern side of Port Phillip Bay and then into the Western Port Bay area. So there's currently about 28 sites with water stewardship plans across all those different catchments. Many of these, well, most of these, I should say, are self-verified. So they're not necessarily certified to the standard, but they go a long way to meeting many of the standard requirements. And there's about 1,000 odd participants across the board with these water stewardship projects. So just a few words about the Murarrie site, Murarrie, Queensland site. As I mentioned before with the standard, so there's the particular outcomes that the standard is trying to achieve. So just picking up on that again and how Ingham's Murarrie has managed to do that. So one of the outcomes there is sustainable water balance. So the Murarrie site has their advanced wastewater treatment plant. It allows 2/3 of the site's water to be recycled back into the plant. On top of that, they're treating a large volume of flush water, which I believe is from their reverse osmosis plant from the site. And this flows out through an on-site pond system for reuse. So they've managed to significantly reduce their water intensity down to 15 litres per bird. And yeah, continually improving with their sustainable water use within the site. Another outcome that the standard focuses on is the important water-related areas. So the way that Ingham's Murarrie has picked up on that is they have the treated water that's coming from the advanced water treatment plant is allowed to flow off the site into swamplands on an adjacent property. They're contributing to traditional owners' culture and values by introducing yellow belly bass into the ponds. And they also have a land for wildlife partnership agreement with Brisbane City Council. With respect to another of the outcomes, so good water quality status, with their treatment plant, they're removing significant quantities of nitrogen from their waste stream. So significant improvements in the water quality of what's being discharged from the factory. And then another outcome there is the good water governance. So contributing to improve catchment governance. So they're working with local stakeholder groups to improve Bulimba Creek and the lower Brisbane catchment. And they're also working across their supply chain. So they ensure that all their state farming managers that are supplying birds to the factory are using a sustainability measurement platform, which is called Envisi. So currently, I can't quite remember how many sites Ingham's has across the board, but they currently have 4 sites that are certified to the Water Stewardship standard. So there's the Murray site that we just spoke about, which has the platinum certification. Somerville also has platinum certification, and then the 2 South Australian sites with core certification and gold certification. And then there are various other sites that are following the water stewardship guidelines but aren't fully certified. So with that, I'll pass back to Bernadette to talk a bit more about this project and why get involved with water stewardship.
Thanks very much, Penny, for that background. And as you can see, from Penny's experience and also, Jane and Nicole in the area, and actually working with AMPC over the last 20 years, which includes, not just interest in water stewardship, but focus on water efficiency and water recycling and wastewater, just means that they're well versed in actually introducing this concept to the red meat processing sector. And so why get involved? Look, this is an area where the red meat industry have already made a lot of headway through water recycling, reuse and efficiency. And AMPC's environmental performance review, as you know, happens every 5 years, and it basically involves Australian red meat processing businesses to voluntarily share information and participate in a plant energy water benchmarking session. And what it's found is that Australian red meat processing industry has reduced water intensity by 8% since 2015. So it's really important in terms of reducing the water intensity and to communicate that. Next slide, please. So it's important then to look at reducing the water intensity and to communicate that, as we said, but also important to strengthen the stakeholder relationships and awareness. And so it is really important about community engagement. And we just have an example here, which isn't so much related to water stewardship, but a really important one, which shows in community engagement. And we got in here from Casino Food Co-op, which is one of AMPC's red meat processing processors, who voluntarily instigated and resourced resilience infrastructure during the flood assistance around Lismore at the time when the floods were happening. And so this photo here you see on the right-hand side shows an army helicopter in the Casino Food Co-op's car park being loaded with donated food packages and assembled and supplied to CFC to feed the 4,000 isolated people. So you can see that there are already examples out there where red meat processors have obviously actively engaged with the community for the betterment of the social outcome. Now, CFC also donated those trucks, drivers and labour to help clean and remove flood debris from dozens of streets. So it's an important way to really strengthen stakeholder relationships and awareness. And this is, as I said, one example where it's not related to water stewardship, but shows the activities that RMPs already have in terms of benefits to the community. So if we go on to the next slide, Penny, please. So in addition to your interest in getting involved in water stewardship, it will strengthen relationships with local and state government bodies. And we saw from the previous case study of Ingham's and how that that consortium of stakeholders included the local governments and the other bodies to ensure that you will have natural resource and catchment groups and also water providers in there. So it's a whole collection of stakeholders there. In addition, it's also important to share some of the challenges that have often gone unnoticed. So if you have a look at some of those clips we see on the slide in regard to the thin reviews there, record cattle prices to hit abattoir jobs, consumer, will then get that in terms of the amount of money cost it is. And there's also other areas around, beef processing capacity majorly impacted by Queensland and New South Wales floods. So, other examples for such as, impact for drought on destocking and delays in restocking impact on the supply into abattoirs, and also delivery to and maintenance of export markets. There's also, in terms of assured supply expectations from the farm to or farm business to the supermarkets and other areas. So the impact of the drought and even challenges such as market limitations around water recycling and the competition for local waters. So this is why it's really important that we start to think about water not as a precious resource and to be planning for water security in times of drought. So if we look at all of the other reasons, we talked, first of all, was about reducing water intensity. As we said in the environmental performance review, we've already seen that red meat processors are doing a good job of that, but we need to communicate that out. It's important to look at strengthening stakeholder relationships and awareness, which then goes on to looking at improving local water quality and also the protection of socially, culturally and environmentally important water-related issues. And if you have a look at some of those headliners there in the Courier, with the meat companies aren't best environmental stewards when it comes to water use. So these are obviously negative effects on the industry, and shows that really that the processors are really needing to communicate the sort of water use there is to the community. And then some other ones there when you say food companies aren't moving quickly enough to feed off global water crisis. So I think it's really important that these communications are out there, and it also, in the last 2 points, provides useful information for investors and disclosure mechanisms such as the CDP, so looking at data platforms. And then, of course, it's important to get involved because it does enable the ability to tackle indirect water use and work with producers to then help along with the supply chain. So if we just go to another example here on Tyson Foods. Tyson Foods is in the US and partnered with My Farms to engage farmers and ranchers in various projects and pilots. My Farms is a farm management software program that provides farmers with insights about the value of conservation practices and enables them to anonymously learn from one another. The baseline data allows Tyson Foods to identify both use of conservation practices and areas for improvement in many areas, including nutrient management practices and conservation practices on the rented land. Now, if we refer this back to the red meat processing industry, many producers already use the beef sustainability framework. So there is potential for the scope that can ensure the indicators actually can include water stewardship metrics as well. Next slide, please. So we also mentioned about informing customers about indirect water use, which is an important area because there is growing interest in the water footprint of red meat. And as you can see from the various clips there, grist, it's a popular news feed. Got a headline there in terms of, is grass-fed beef better in a drought? And so all these questions consumers do wonder, and it does drive their consumer behaviour. So, interestingly, if you see there, a recent study that undertook a water scarcity assessment of a typical adult Australian daily diet using agricultural water use data for major food processing regions in Australia, and water estimates water use estimates for processing industries. And the number of businesses in each region found in Australian context that there was actually less evidence that fresh meat consumption was of greater importance to water scarcity than most other food groups. And so it's important to convey this to consumers so they're not asking sort of for their understanding of the indirect water use. And in fact, if we look at this slide, fresh meat, seafood, beef, lamb, poultry, if you have a look at those food groups, contribute less than 8% of the total dietary water footprint, as you can see in those figures on the right-hand side. And the study's authors advises focusing community education on reducing discretionary food and beverage intake that is detrimental to health anyway, contributes up to 36% water scarcity impacts, which is very much larger than the 8%. And of course, this is in line with the Global Sustainable Development Goal, SDGs 4, 12, and also 14, which are all related to focus on encouraging consumers to make healthy dietary choices. Next slide. So I'll just spend a little bit of time to introduce what this project is about in terms of like the overall objectives, and then to hone in on to what the next steps are. So we're doing this project from really a catchment mapping and stakeholder engagement point of view, so that we can increase knowledge of water stewardship in relation to the red meat processing sector. The first 2 months we'll be developing what's known as a catchment mapping and stakeholder engagement guidelines for the red meat processing industry. And then over the period of October, November, December, we will put out, through mapping the catchment and also then collecting data, get a stakeholder engagement plan whereby we'll then also select 2 red meat processors to road test the actual guidelines. And that's where really we understand exactly how this water stewardship fits in with red meat processors. So just outlined that time frame there. We're currently undertaking a literature review, which will then be producing a fact sheet, which will be available to processors. And so over the next 2 months, during August and September, we'll be developing draft catchment mapping and stakeholder engagement guidelines for the RMP industry. And further on there, we'll work with 2 particular processors who obviously have an interest in this and are able to provide data for which we can use to therefore map the catchment and collect the data. And then we will create a stakeholder engagement plan for those 2 processors. Next slide, please. So if we want looking at the next steps around applying those draft guidelines, with basically 3 areas of interest and for which we will be using. First of all, what do we actually do in the mapping the catchment? It's first of all defining the site and the boundaries for which the catchment lies. And then we'll also provide resources to assist you with mapping typical water-related infrastructure, water sources, discharge points and receiving bodies. The next step then is to gather water-related data for the catchment, which includes undertaking a catchment water balance and resource, including water quality, water-related legal and regulatory requirements, identifying, map and determine status of the important water-related areas, including exposure to extreme events, We'll also be then looking at quantifying the social and cultural water-related values generated by the site, and information on water governance initiatives related to red meat processes, and the efforts that the industry can take to support catchment level data collection and resources. And then lastly, we need to then apply best practice on this all, and so we'll bring this all together in terms of the sector, catchment, regional and national best practice relevant to red meat processes and examples. So what we'll also do in terms of the site data collection, which the trial sites which we will have will be quite advanced on this, and therefore not so much included as such here in this project. But again, 3 steps are important in this regard. It's important to gather water-related data for the site, and as I mentioned, water balances, identifying mapping status, so everything that we mentioned in the previous slide, and then going on to gather the data on the site's indirect water use. So it's important in terms of information on embedded water use of primary inputs for AMP, quantity, quality and level of water risk, and information on embedded water use of typical outsourced services for red meat processes. And then to apply this in best practice, so we'll be looking at the red meat processing sector or the catchment which they sit in, and then apply that to relevant red meat processes, and then giving examples there. So we've got then to have the stakeholder engagement part, which is then to look at identifying relevant stakeholders. These are looking more at the possible current and then also future stakeholders for the red meat processing sector, and then linking the stakeholder challenges with the site's water challenges and opportunities. And again, so we will determine social, cultural, environmental or economic interests which are all shared, how they link with the processor in that catchment, the challenges and opportunities that are associated with the links, and then that assessing really that ability or level of willingness for engagement. So there's a number of areas for which we will determine in terms of actually linking those tangible connections with stakeholders in the site. And then to provide evidence of the stakeholders' consultation by the site. Types of consultation methods suitable for red meat processing will be undertaken, and then we'll also assess the effectiveness of consultation. And continuing on the stakeholder engagement, to understand current and future shared water challenges in the catchment, along with understanding those common links between the stakeholders in the catchment, as well as red meat processors, and then really looking at what are the most important and to prioritise those. We'd also look at, not just from a challenge point of view, but also from an opportunities point of view, and then assess any future water issues with links to red meat processors, and then to have a look at some examples and case studies of initiatives with stakeholders undertaken to address shared water challenges and opportunities. So as you can see, we're trying to really bring in any sort of examples that are already happening within the catchment so that we can identify those opportunities in the future. And part of the stakeholder engagement is to understand the site's water risks and opportunities. Second point, we're looking at typical site water risks, how to prioritise those, some of the opportunities in the same way, and then to close off using examples and case studies. And then we will be looking at the site's commitment to water stewardship by providing a template of the site statement. So that is basically the methodology for which we will run through with the processing sector, and for those who are very interested in that. So with that, I thank very much and hand over to you, Matt. With the last 15 minutes, we will open it to discussion.
Yes, thanks, Bernadette. We've got a handful of questions, but before I go through the questions, I'd really like to thank yourself and Penny for those presentations. I'd heard about the Ingham's good work around water stewardship, but I'd never actually seen the case study presented that Penny presented so well. So that was certainly enlightening for me. And also, Bernadette, thanks for pointing out so well the opportunity for our red meat processor members to improve governance and even achieve leadership, perhaps, on water. So there are lots of benefits that that can be achieved under this shorter version of water stewardship, which is just the community aspect of it. So I'll just go through some questions and hand those to the team to answer. The first one here I've got is, how long does the water stewardship certification process take? And what about just the catchment mapping and community engagement piece? So I'll pass that to the team. I'm not sure who'd like to go first on that one. Sorry. Go ahead, Penny.
So yeah, so I mentioned there's like the 50 to 60 odd indicators in the standard, and so depending on the number of indicators that a company picks up, the first step is that core certification, and then that's followed by gold or platinum. So to reach core certification, you'd probably be looking at 1 to 2 years, depending on whether you can hit the ground running and whether you've got a lot of that base information to begin with, or whether a company's starting from scratch with, you know, all the water balances and that kind of thing. So for core certification, it'd be sort of 1 to 2 years to get that. And sorry, what was the other part of the question?
Oh, the other part was, what about just the catchment mapping and community engagement piece?
Yeah, so that's one of the first steps before you sort of publicly commit to doing a water stewardship project, is to have a really good understanding of who is in your catchment and looking at who you might be able to engage with across the catchment. So, you know, for some catchments, so I'll just mention Fitzroy Basin. They have a water stewardship project that's been running for quite a few years, and they're quite advanced. There's many stakeholders that are involved in that project. And so, you know, for a catchment that sort of has the water stewardship mindset already, things are going to be a lot quicker. But if you're sort of starting from scratch and you're really just putting feelers out to see who you might be able to engage with and how you can engage with them, yeah, there's no set period, I guess. It all depends, you know, on how ready and willing people are to engage. So, yeah.
That's a good point, Penny. That Fitzroy Basin is very well advanced, so that could be an easy adjunct bit of work for any member in that location. Next question is, how advanced does a site need to be with respect to water management to participate in this project?
So the site really needs to have a pretty good understanding of how they're managing water internally. So need to have some good water balance information, you know, have a 12-month baseline for their water use, have good information about the water that's being discharged. So they really need to have a pretty good understanding of how they're managing water internally at their site, particularly with this project, because we only have funding to focus on the first step of the water stewardship standard. We'd be looking to work with processors that have a good understanding of their water usage and efficiency and management at a site level.
Thanks. Nicole, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay, you had your microphone on, that's all. Just thought I'd ask. And then another question there, will a site get any level of water stewardship certification from the project?
So this will be it's a stepping stone for them. So this project is really just introducing the concept of water stewardship and the water stewardship standard. So it'd be setting the groundwork and getting all that baseline information and thinking about who they would engage with within their catchment. But with this project, no, they wouldn't get to the stage of being certified. There's quite a bit of work involved with that. But yeah, the groundwork would be set.
Thanks, Penny. Yep. Another question is, what will be the process for stakeholder engagement?
I can answer that one, Penny, if you like. So basically, it's first about identifying the stakeholders in their catchment and finding out their interests, and what challenges they're trying to address, and then lining those up with what the site challenges are, and then assessing their level of influence and interest in addressing those challenges together. And so you don't really start the stakeholder engagement until you're really well informed, basically, about the stakeholders in the catchment. At that point, you develop a plan about how you're going to target your engagement. So you might just keep some stakeholders informed, while others you might be actively seeking to get involved, or you might be trying to get partnerships with other stakeholders. And part of this project will be looking at, what are the best ways to do those engagements with those different types of stakeholders.
Thanks, Nicole. And there's the last question here. I don't have any more at this stage, and we've probably only got 5 minutes left anyway. So the last question was around the level of water efficiency, or to what level should plants their own water impacts be prior to engaging in water stewardship. So I guess how sophisticated do plants need to be involved in this first stage of water stewardship?
Are you referring to this project or in general, Matt?
Why don't you answer that in two parts? That'd be good, Nicole.
Okay. All right. So I'll just go back to Ingham's, for example, and their Bolivia site. They introduced a program which was basically looking at changing staff behaviours and looking at where they could possibly reuse water. And they've actually made huge savings there. So, you know, they could be at the very start of looking at their efficiency. For this project, I'll open that up to Penny and Bernadette. At what level do you think the sites participating should be in terms of their efficiency?
Yeah, you go, Bernadette.
Oh, I guess you already mentioned, Penny, in that they need to at least have a good handle on their water use internally and to have a good lot of data. From an efficiency side of things, I think they need to be, at least understanding that they've explored, some most basic practices on the site. You mentioned, Nicole, around documenting just changing behaviour, and I know that that's certainly been some sort of things we've looked at with processes around how you educate. I think there has to be some sort of minimum understanding of where they have achieving efficiencies in the first place, and I'm sure all processes are, and that really have undertaken that to a certain degree. And but there will be, I think that they're always looking at reducing water use, and as I said, the environmental performance review shows that the processes are active in that. There'll be different degrees, but I think it'd be just maybe plant by plant basis as well.
Thanks.
It's probably just handy. Sorry, Matt. It's probably just handy if you're going out to the community wanting to address water challenges, that you can actually demonstrate to them that you are taking your own initiatives to reduce your water challenges as well. That's probably the key.
Thanks, Nicole. So we're just about out of time. So as a thank you, I'd like to thank the whole team, particularly from our lead provider, USQ, which is Bernadette McCabe and Catherine Reardon-Smith, for participating in this project and also the webinar. And then our team from the Eco-Efficiency Group, Penny Prasad, Jane Gaffel and Nicole Price. And just a reminder that for members on this webinar of the next steps, so there will be an expression of interest process for members to participate in this community engagement part of the water stewardship standard. So it is not a full-blown certification, so don't be afraid to participate in that expression of interest. It's a first step for red meat processors in water stewardship, and we've got really good team members, as you can see from our presentation today, that can help with that. So I'd encourage anyone to put up their hand and partake in the opportunity to improve their governance and perhaps even achieve leadership in their community around water stewardship. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending, and please be in touch with ourselves and we'll send out the EOI next week, hopefully on Monday, and we'll talk again. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.